Welcome back. Thanks for staying tuned. Now, one issue that has many people giving various views is the economy. While there are visible numbers showing real growth, many say the accompanying development in the lives of over 200 million Nigerians is absent. Let's pause for a moment and examine the state of the economy in the last 4 years. Well, I understand that the economy report is a bit further down, but so let's introduce our panel then. Joining us here in the studios, Dr. Biodun Adedipe is a well-known economist. Thank you so much. Welcome back. Thank you for being with us at this time. Mr. Bismarck Rowane of Financial Derivatives Company, thank you so much for joining us. And of course, Mr. Marcel Okeke is an economic analyst and he's a former chief economist at Zenith Bank. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Someone was saying that we have a lot of economic heavyweights in the room.
Yes, earlier on.
We should get ready for the figures.
The figures. And actually, there's quite a lot that has happened. And I'm being told in Abuja, we have the National President of the Nigerian Labour Congress, Mr. Ayuba Waba. Mr. Waba, thank you so much for joining us from Abuja. But as I was going to start, actually.
Yes, I was going to say we should start with Mr. Rowane because yes. He had talked about a gloom, a boom, and then a recession, and then a slowdown. So just give us a bit of background. And then.
Okay. We're going to look at 2014, 2019, and 2021, where we'll be 2 years from today. We looked at 19 indicators. Of these 19 indicators, 11 moved negatively and 9 moved positively. Starting with GDP itself, it was $568 billion in 2014. It's down to $482 billion because of the depreciation of the currency. The growth rate was 6.2% in 2014. It's now down to 1.91 and just going back up to 2.03. The oil price at that time was $99. It's now at $68. Oil production was 1.91 billion barrels. It's now 1.75 billion. So those four are negative. On-grid power was 3,790 megawatts. It's now 4,116. That's positive. External reserves was $34 billion. It's now $45 billion. That's positive. But the external debt was $9 billion. It's now up to $25 billion.
Wow. So
when you take your reserves and you subtract your debt, we call it the buffers. The buffers in 2014 was $24 billion. The buffers are now down to $19 billion. That's negative. The exchange rate was 191 naira to a dollar in 2014. It's now 361 naira to a dollar. Projected to go to 400 in 20. The other...
Did you say projected to go to 400?
2021. The trade balance, which is the difference between your exports and your imports, was -$6 billion in 2014. It has gone to 23.5 positive. That's a big swing. That's positive. The inflation rate was 9.6 in 2014. It's now 11.37. Unemployment plus underemployment was 29.1% in 2014. It's now 43.2%. Wow. So the misery index was 38.7 in 2014, and it's 54.57 in 2019. The minimum wage was 18,000 in 2014. It's now 30,000. And the income per capita was $2,726 in 2014. It's now $2,400. That has gone down. Ease of doing business was once we were ranked 170 in 2014. We are now improved to 146 because the higher you go in there. Ease of doing business score, we had 47 points in 2014. We're now 52 positive. Transparency index, however, we're 136. We are now down to 144 because, obviously. And life expectancy in 2014 was 52 years, and now it's 53 years, so we've gone up 1 point. So in all, 19 indicators, 11 negative, 8 positive. But more important is the citizen scorecard. In 2014, you were buying Gari for 13,500. That bag of Gari is now 6,500. That's positive. Rice was 9,500. It's now 15,000 naira. And that's negative. Beans was 14,000 naira in 2014. It's now 19,000 naira. It's gone up by 36%. Gala remained the same, 100 naira, 100 naira. But the strip of meat in the gala is smaller.
I was waiting for that, yeah.
Yes,
Palm oil, 9,000 in 2014 is 9,000 now. And tomatoes was 4,350 kg bag. In 2014, it is now 18,000.
Yes,
it's
and
gone
all the
up
women can
by
attest to that
319%.
yeah.
And petrol was 97 naira per liter, and it's now 145 naira per liter. So that's the story. What do the international community think about us? The IMF says economy is recovering, structural and policy challenges exist, there's an infrastructure gap. They're recommending stop multiple exchange rates, which is necessary, improve tax collection, stop waivers and exemptions, and tighten money supply. The EIU says the business environment is unlikely to improve. Weak government institutions will persist, oil revenue likely to underperform, and current account will record thinner surpluses. Recommending market-oriented reforms, boost tax compliance, do away with multiple exchange rates, have one exchange rate. Economic performance will pick up moderately. In final analysis, the outlook is this. The must-dos say you have the new agenda, old wine in old bottles or old wine in new bottles, what you think. So challenges to address recessionary gap is 1%, it's declining, there's still a risk. Suboptimal investment level, you need to increase investments and encourage investment. You have to increase your buffers. What we must do, we must sign the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. We must work towards forex convertibility. We must reduce subsidies gradually, investment in road and rail transport, airport concessioning, block leakages, and simplify tax administration. What we may do, the unification of exchange rates, lease and sale of idle assets, convert power sector loans into equity, and shift subsidies from wasteful consumption. What we may not do is remove subsidies completely, sell refineries, and restructure the forex market. In all, finally, President's first official duty will be to pick his cabinet. Key appointments were finished in June. Portfolio and personality changes made. Policy continuity. Execution of policy response to shocks will be the major challenge. Inflationary pressures will persist. Unemployment will increase. Minimum wage will be paid, and likely adjustments to taxes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Whoa.
Wow.
That's
a lot to swallow in one.
That's a lot to absorb. But in absorbing that, Mr. Waba, you're president of the NLC, and in that regard, you could be regarded as the people giving some sort of scorecard. One of the things that Mr. Rewane just pointed out is that the minimum wage will be paid. That's the expectation. What's your own assessment of how the economy has done in the last 4 years from the position of a worker who earns a wage?
Well, I think the economists have tried to give us exactly how the economy has performed, particularly looking at the indices, the issue of inflation, the issue of purchasing power of Nigerians, but importantly is also the positive aspects, which clearly states that you recalled we're in an economy that was in recession, and cost of goods and services at the time actually soared very high, particularly food items. But I think clearly from what he has said, some of the positives is the fact that we expect that there will be growth in the economy, because the performance of the economy invariably also affects the performance or the lifestyle or how Nigerians will fare. And that's why Labour always is interested in the performance of the economy. If you look at the indices and what has happened, that's why clearly from the issue of cost of goods and services, that's how the issue of minimum wage became an issue to the workers, because one, is very clear from the analysis that the purchasing power of workers was actually affected by some of the cost of goods and services. But I think clearly workers will be so much interested in how we're able to make sure that the economy works, because it's when the economy works that the life of Nigerians will be affected. Because all this theory, I believe that what will make it work is actually if we're able to reduce items that we can produce here at home. Particularly, I don't think we need to import items that we don't need. And I think that has been the bane of our economy. Most of our forex and exchanges goes on importing items that are not necessary. Well, today we have become one of the highest producers of rice in the world. We have overtaken Egypt. That is positive. And I think we should go into other sectors, textile, manufacturing. We should actually add value. Where we have comparative advantage, like the issue of agriculture, we should be able to add value. That will actually earn us foreign exchange, and that will assist. Secondly, this issue of refining capacity is also something that is very central, because I listened to him carefully about this issue of subsidy. We can end the regime of subsidy, because clearly you can see that despite the fact that we have tried to address many other issues, the challenge in the oil and gas sector have remained, because we have not been able to utilize our potential effectively, which will create jobs, which is part of what he has raised, that certainly the issue of jobs will be a problem, which will also assist in generating revenue to actually address the issue of infrastructure. But by and large, is the issue of tax. Today in Nigeria, the facts are very obvious. What is our tax to GDP? It's only workers that pay the correct tax. In fact, I was reading recently, politicians that have filled various forms to contest for political offices. If you look at what they have declared as tax, it's not something to write home about. So clearly, if we are to make progress, it's not to continue to tax the poor. It's actually to tax the rich to subsidize for the poor. This is what happens everywhere around the world. So if we want our economy actually to progress, certainly we must also look inwardly. Because I don't want us to over-rely on this prescription by IMF or World Bank. Because time and time again, they have come with the prescription of, well, let us devalue our currency. We have been devaluing our currency for the past 3 decades, and we have not seen an end to it. And therefore, this issue of the issue of exchange rate and the prescription of we must continue to devalue our currency, I think we must find a way around it. But clearly, I think with the positive signs, we should be able to make sure that those positive signs, we are able to leverage on them. And clearly, there are areas I think we can tap into, like the issue of taxation, which I think currently, in the current system, the inland revenue have done well, and I think they can still do good, because that's the main source of revenue for governments around the world. Rich must continue to subsidize for the poor. And for the working class, why we are passionate about the minimum wage is the fact that some of the criteria and indices he has read clearly have affected workers that have fixed wages. From 18,000, you have seen some of the out-of-pocket expenses and some of the expenses, and particularly some of the costs that have actually been brought into workers. So it's also, when you also increase the minimum wage, clearly it will affect the economy, because it is a disposable income that will stimulate the economy, that will make purchasing and production to go on simultaneously. Many countries around the world have done that. In the midst of recession in the US, Obama increased the minimum wage. And his understanding is that once there is economic activity going on, workers will be able to pay for their school fees, they will be able to feed, they will be able to actually buy goods and services. So it's the income. It's a disposable income that goes around and kickstart the economy, so that we can be able to reduce poverty, because if the economy is doing well, our expectation is that poverty should also be reduced. Okay, but Mr. clearly Waba, you can see that with some of those indices, yes, there are challenges, but I think they are very positive.
Perspective from the economists that we have here in Lagos. We'll come back to you. And that's where I want to ask you, Mr. Adedipe, a question concerning the government's investment in people. Now, not just in the economy, but in its people. And the whole hullabaloo about social investment programs. We've heard a lot about it from the 70s, from SAP, and then there was MAMSA, poverty eradication. They came up with WIN, Shopee. Now we're talking about Empower, conditional cash transfer, trader money, etc. How much of this is impacting on the Nigerian person? Forget about the argument of, you know, the recent argument, did it really make any difference? How much of it is impacting on the people itself?
Well, very good issue you raised here. In the sense that the different components of the social investment programs have actually impacted, and I will put some numbers to it, an interpretation of that. And that starts from the Empower, okay? Now, what the Empower does is to have university graduates sign on to that program. They receive training, what we call employability skills training, in which case what had been a problem was we were producing unemployable graduates. And so this scheme now makes them employable. But not only that, it gives them also gadgets that they will require in delivering services that they have been trained for. Then thirdly, over the 2-year window, they be a part of that. They also receive monthly stipend, which means you are not only being prepared for the world of work, as we call it in consulting, but equally you are being kitted, so to say, and prepared to be employable when you exit the scheme.
Yes, Mr.
So
I will let you go on, but you will
now,
also respond on the other side of the break to some of the things the graduates are saying, that after the program, they cannot find work. That's some of the things we are hearing, but you respond to that when we come back from this break. Thank you. Yeah.
All right, welcome back. Thanks for staying tuned. It's still our segment on the economy, and some are saying, well, this is the bread and butter of the entire program, because this is the one that affects most people. And for that purpose, we have 3 of the nation's most senior economists with us here. And then we have the national leader of Nigerian workers in our Abuja studios. Once again, gentlemen, thank you for being with us. Dr. Adedipe, before we went on the break, you were trying to break down the social investment programs and where the benefits are. IJ, but you did point out that there are some complaints.
Yeah, I did point out that for the Empower, for instance, the graduates say that it's all nice when they're on the 2-year program and they get the stipend. They're employable, but not employed after that.
Now, my worry about that interpretation is this. Now, is it about the stipend or the skills and knowledge you acquire in that process?
Yes, they have the skills, but then they're not employed with their skills.
You see, the issue for me is not so much as you don't get employed by government, because the role of the government is not to employ them in the first instance. And we must begin to change the conversation in that direction. Now, and I will situate that in terms of the data, all right? If you look at government spend, the 3 tiers of the government in Nigeria, vis-a-vis the private sector, that is compared to our GDP, governments altogether account for less than 10% of the spend in a year. So if we all begin to look at government to provide jobs for us, that will be looking in the wrong direction.
Dr. Adegbe,
So
they didn't have the jobs in the first place. There were no jobs, and so the government decided this is a program or project. And then they're back in that same situation.
To empower them.
To empower, yes, that's
now,
the idea.
You see, my interpretation of it is this. If I get empowered, my mindset should change in terms of what I can do. Maybe even instead of looking for employment, I can become an employer of labor. And so we need to also help our youth to see things differently and change the narrative. Now, there's the other aspect also of the social intervention programs, and that is the homegrown school feeding program, all right, which, in fact, to me, has a deeper economic impact than Empower. And it is very simple. Now, if every child in primary school gets fed, that means someone has to cook the meals, someone needs to supply the items that will be used to make the meals, and that takes the entire value chain from the farm, poultry, fish farm, to the cook, and now the meal or the table of the pupil. Now, if you look at the number, over 96,000 cooks involved in that nationally, and yet, as at that time, we had not covered the entire 6 states, talking about 24 at a time. Now, not only that, you look at the number of pupils being fed daily. So that talks to the quality of nutrition that the food they get. Now, that also from the research done by nutritionists and also those who are involved in neuroscience, they tell you that the best time to help a child's brain to grow is the early years. And it has to do also with what to feed them with. So a child properly fed also develops the mental capacity to learn. And so all of these have been proven by science.
So you feel that the social investment programs are on course and
it's
having impact?
Yeah, it's having impact.
Mr. Okeke, is that how you see it?
Well, if that is the question, yes. I don't think it's a waste of resources because the situation on ground was properly, studied before government, decided to come up with those initiatives. Somebody could look at them from a political point of view, like when the vice president was going around sharing some money.
A lot of people were looking at the timing that was happening.
Trader money.
Yes,
just on the eve of the recent elections. But the truth is that before he went on sharing those monies, the government had laid out his plan. And so it was a question of timing. And if they could use one stone to kill several birds, why not?
Good point. Yes. But let me ask you this. The budget, given what we know so far and what the statistics that Mr. Rewane and Ayuba Waba pointed out, and even what Dr. Adedipe is talking about, the social investment program. Of course, the government has made it clear it intends to continue with the social investment program because, as he pointed out, they haven't covered everybody yet. But now, in terms of the larger economy and the impact on the various categories of people we have here in the studio and across the country, now we've got the 2019 budget. I know the first thing anybody can say is that, yes, it's coming in June, but we have it nevertheless. Is it in that direction? Is it in the direction that someone like you would like to see it go, even taking a viewpoint such as our debt to revenue ratio?
Well, talking about the budget, or let me start from the social investment you mentioned. Social investment is just an aspect of, what the government is doing to, get the economy developing, because it's taking care of human beings. You understand? Just like it's been established. But when you come to the budget is just for 1 year, okay? And the budget is built in the context of what the government has on ground, which is a plan, economic recovery and growth plan, okay? Which is a 3-year plan. And so the budget is in the context of that. But let me also tell you, the challenge with the budget in previous years, and it's going to be, is time and timing. Like you have said, the budget was signed just yesterday. I think I'm right. And so if the budget was signed, then start implementing the budget. And the budget is meant to last for 12 months. And here we are in the middle of the year. So how far that will go, I don't know. And a new government is going to come in place in terms of new appointments. And those people have to settle down to begin to look at what is in the budget and then begin to move forward. So I cannot be speaking for the government. But my view is that they may not do much, given that there's going to be this transition, and you have to have new people in place, okay? But that is on one hand. On the other hand, because you have the appointment of somebody like the governor of the central bank, reconfirmed or renewed, shows that there's going to be some kind of continuity, with many of the programs, even those on ground. The budget is just for 1 year. They have some programs that, last for longer period. Just like a lot the central bank on its part has been initiated. When we talk about the Anchor Borrowers Program that has done a lot in the area of agriculture. When we talk about what it's about to do in the area of textile, to revive the textile sector.
Which Mr. Ayuba Waba
was talking about, yes. Okay? I talk about, its effort to diversify the economy, which is a major issue. But the challenge over the years has been effective diversification of the economy. Because it's been turned into a mere sing song. Exactly. People talking about diversification, but on ground, you don't see it. The diversification has to be effective. And for it to be effective means that if you move into something like mining, you have to do mining in such a way that you add value and export whatever you come out with to begin to earn foreign exchange, to help the oil sector. You understand? That makes this economy to be like a monoproduct economy. Yeah, so if that is not achieved, we have not done diversification.
That's what I was going to ask Mr. Rewane as well, because you hear a lot about diversifying from oil. Let's look at other areas. Yeah. And then you look at those other areas, what is actually being put into those areas? I know Mr. Marcel talked about textiles and what they're trying to do, but people's tastes have changed. People are looking elsewhere.
Talk is cheap. You see, you must differentiate between analysis and propaganda. The fact is that what is the impact? Are people feeling it? What you hear, what you feel, and what you see are three different things. They should be the same. The reality is that you're talking about 96,000 people in a 200 million population economy. It's not going to move the needle. The total spend of 9 trillion naira in a 130 trillion naira economy is not going to move the needle. There are 2.1 million federal government employees. There are 1.9 million state employees. There are 400,000 youth corpers. Their total salaries and everything put together is not enough to do anything.
So why do they budget that then?
No, see, the budget, government spending is only $22 billion in a $470 billion economy. Private investment alone is 3 times government investment, and yet we have not even started. So for you to, anybody can come and say they're doing programs and programs. Small minds talk about people. Big minds talk about ideas. How are you going to make this thing impactful? If you don't grow at 4%, you will not absorb your population growth rate. If you don't grow at 6%, you will not get full employment. If you don't grow at 8%, you are not going to transform the economy. How do you grow at 8%? You must increase the amount of investment. The investment both from international, domestic, and diaspora sources. All of that put together gives you the investment multiplier, where people will then be employed. If not, you are going to have people coming out with skills, and they will not be able to do anything. Labor productivity growth is negative in this country. So we have to go back to the drawing board. And the NLC, the comrade, said something about international investment and free economics. The truth is that a flexible exchange rate does not mean depreciation. A currency can appreciate. When the oil revenue increases, the currency will appreciate. And when revenues deplete, you do it. But if when there's surpluses, it is stolen, then you will have a currency weakness because of external imbalances. So when you look at people who are claiming credit for all sorts of things, the truth is that when you have, if you borrow money to put into your savings account, of course it will increase. So when you talk about high reserves and all sorts of things, it's good and it sounds good. But the reality is, what is the impact? How have is there growth? No. Growth is 2%, is below population growth rate. Are there jobs? No. Unemployment has increased. So the president is quite clear in his determination that he wants to make this thing work. And he's trying to organize his mind to see how it's going to work. But work to the extent that it will have an impact and make people feel it. So that what you say, what you see, and what you feel is the same thing. There's too much propaganda in this country.
How quickly do you want to see the new cabinet constituted? I'm going to ask you that as well, because obviously there's work to do. It's the same administration. So, Dr. Adedipe, for instance, you know, it took ages. I mean, it was such a debate. Oh, it's taken so long to get the ministers and the team together. How fast should they be now?
Well, really, for a president who won re-election, I don't expect that to take as long as it did 4 years ago. So, and if you ask my candid opinion, I would say you should put that together within the next 2 months. By July...
2 months.
2 months?
No, what is the meaning of that?
1 week.
A week.
No, you see, it has to go through a process. Don't forget, there's a process involved.
No, you can nominate them. And
There is a process involved.
The budget has
forget.
just been signed.
That's right.
2 months,
1 week.
that's looking at August.
No, I'm talking about this process that ends with them in office.
Why are our processes this way? Are
He
we
has
the only
no control
No,
over what the
you're
National
asking
Assembly will
another
do.
question now.
No,
Why
that's
are the
another
processes
thing.
this
For the
long?
nomination.
It's a different question.
We will nominate,
Okay.
but the National Assembly has to process and approve them.
Now, at this point, I'm
Has he
beginning to
control
hear.
over that?
I'm beginning to hear.
He has no control over that.
I'm beginning to hear buzz in the audience. Are there questions or comments?
Yes.
I will ask the person who is closest to the microphone here and who I don't think has spoken tonight to please come. And then others who have questions should please move in the direction of the microphone so that we won't have that large movement. Yes, please. Yes, can you step to the microphone and introduce yourself and make your question or comment very short, please.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Awoyeme Emmanuel, and by God's grace, I'm a product development consultant and a regulatory affairs manager in the pharmaceutical sector. So when they tell us that there is ease of doing business, that statement was not square with my own experience engaging NAFDAC to get some drug product registered. Because as of today, you can't imagine the dysfunction and mediocrity in that institution, really. I mean, you get documents from foreign manufacturers to register your products, and they don't get processed and all that. But that is on one side. I would also want to mention that my own view about the state of the economy aligns so much with Mr. Binkman-Kirwani's view, really. Because it is very sad that we are growing this economy at 2%, really. At 2%, and how much jobs can we create at that level? But then, I would just want to ask Mary that, what are those policy prescriptions, really, that can be, marshaled to grow this economy at least at 10% for another 10 years, really? Because any growth that's less than 10% for 10 years, I mean, will take us nowhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Is there another question so we can take
other questions? Yes, please, madam.
Mr. Rwane, that
So
one
then
is for you,
after her, you, madam.
Yeah, I'm Sekeno Lawal, Chairperson Women Journalists Lagos Chapter. My question has to do with the fact that, because I want to also to look at this whole issue holistically, the economy. In the last 3-4 years, whenever I hear about diversification, what I'm expecting by now is for us to have had maybe like 6-7 other refineries. The steel company in Lokoja should have been up and doing. Many of these factories, I'm sure if we have all these, we will not be here talking about insecurity here, insecurity there, because I see a whole lot of things so interwoven. We have a lot of our politicians bringing in arms. We are talking about proliferations of arms. And we've not even seen in courts of law, they've arrested so many things from the customs, from the ports, and we don't even have information. And these are individuals bringing in arms. What are we doing about all these things? I'm sure we have to have so many things serving as deterrents. You don't
Madam,
even
I'm
see
going to have to
people
put you
being
on pause and ask the third speaker to talk because of time. We have a minute to break, and I want to take our question before we go on break. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
So that one will be for Mr. Okeke.
Thank you. I'm Comrade Medina Balogun, an ex-official with the Nigeria Labour Congress, Lagos State Council. I want to ask, at times I wonder if we can really talk about economic development without talking about industrialization and revival of our industries. Go to our industrial areas in Isolo, Ikeja, go to Kaduna, go to Kano, all of them are in comatose. Most of these factories have been turned to warehouses. So we know that the government has kept on telling us that they've been doing a lot. It's not enough to just give grants, like the BOI loan and other things. If the infrastructure is not put in place, this loan that they give will still go the way the initial capital went.
Thank you very much. I'm going to have to put you on pause.
Dr. Adedikpe. So industrialization, Mr. Rwane growing the economy by 2%, and the other question for you as well.
And we'll be taking a break now. When we come back, there's a big elephant in the room that seems to have avoided notice so far. Power supply.
No.
We'll come to that after the break. Please stay with us.
Definitely. Someone will get that talking. Hey, you're welcome back to the program. It's the eve of the inauguration, and we're looking into all the issues. It's getting very interesting in the studio now as we're talking about those issues that get to the heart of the people. 3 seasoned economists and also the labor leader there in Abuja. So we took the questions before the other half of the break, and I'm going to let each of you respond, starting with Mr. Rwane, responding to this 2% growth.
The prescriptions.
Exactly, the prescriptions that we
to make
have.
it, he was very specific in the question. He said he wants a prescription that ensures 10% growth over the next 10 years.
In other words, he wants to
Mr. Adedikpe is looking in the sky.
He wants to grow GDP by 100% in 10 years.
In 10 years.
It's doable. China's done it, but you got to be bold and you got to be smart about it. So what are the things that we need to do? First and foremost, to understand that we're not a rich country, right? And therefore, we got to decide the things we cannot do. You cannot spend money you don't have, right? And so somebody talked about building Lokoja, and each of those things costs a lot of money. We don't have the resources. So we need to prioritize all those things that will have the greatest impact. One. Two, we've got to stop telling lies to ourselves and to people, right? That's true. So we have to de-emphasize propaganda. Now, we now need to de-bottleneck the economy. They are gridlocked. APAPA and others, you have to de-bottleneck it. You need to increase investment. The investment is only $66 billion of a $490 billion economy. It has to double or quadruple. And how do you do that? By incentivizing investment, not what you say, but what you do. You don't go harassing people who are investing. You allow them to invest, and you encourage them and motivate them to do that. You cannot grow the economy if interest rates are at cutthroat levels. So you can't say on one hand you are doing that and then you intervene in the economy. There's no need having intervention. If your schools are good, you don't need lesson teachers, right? So if your loans and your financial system is working, you do not need intervention. Naturally, they should have that. Intervention is coming for the underprivileged and the less. So logistics and transportation, pipelines, rail, airports, roads, you have to invest in them so that even if you produce, you can get the goods to market. Technology, you cannot overemphasize technology. FinTech and all of that, you need technology, you need productivity, and you need electricity to drive this.
Let me put you on pause when you get to electricity. Dr. Adedipe, please.
All right, now the issue of industrialization came up. The thing with industrialization is very simple. And what it says is you want to enter the factory, bring in the raw materials, process them, and get the finished products out of the factory gate to the final consumer. So that what are the things required in that process? First is where your raw materials are, then the infrastructure required to get it in and finished products out. So in which case you then begin to talk about the drivers and of course the enablers. So you need good roads. And that is where I disagree with most people who say, oh, we have too much borrowing. Now, you cannot eat your cake and have it. You don't want to borrow, and you want good infrastructure. So the critical question for an economist is, if you borrow,
what do you use it for?
To what end? So if you borrow to develop or renew your infrastructure, that is in the right direction. So in which case, what you do will enable you to generate even more revenue and then empower the private sector. Okay, Mr. Rwani has been talking about investment. In reality, government doesn't invest.
Government spends.
It's the private sector that invests. So for them, therefore, what they will do is to create an enabling environment. And I must also mention here, government cannot do anything about interest rates in the environment where we operate now. And that's the global pattern anyway. So what happens with that is an issue between the banks and the central bank. But if you get back to the banks also, they will make the argument that, look, the cost of funds is high, and the cost of doing business, on the other hand, is also high. And that connects to infrastructure. Okay? So if we improve infrastructure, that will impact the cost of doing business.
I have to put you on pause, Dr. Adedipe.
Yes.
Mr. Okeke.
Okay. I think I have to talk on the issue of diversification.
Yes.
I want to say that we have not seen what everybody has been expecting in the area of diversification for a number of reasons. It even has to do with the mindset of the average Nigerian. Over the years, we are all used to the monoproduct economy, which is oil. And all of us have that mindset of oil, living on oil. So for you to even diversify, who will you now encourage and convince to go into any other thing other than that established petrodollar or naira that is flowing everywhere? You understand? So there is need to government to even have something that will reorientate people to now believe that outside oil, you can do something else and survive. And that ties in with what Biodu Adedipe was talking about, the end power. Where you have these young people, being weaned from the oil mindset. And that is why government is doing what is doing in some of the areas. But let me also say that diversification also has a connection with the ease of doing business. The infrastructure challenge is a serious constraint, to doing certain things. And so government has started to do something in the area of ease of doing business. It's a journey. It's not something they can, given where we are coming from. It's not something we arrive at the El Dorado in just a question of 1 month or 1 year. And that is why the little government did in the past few years, in the World Bank ranking of ease of doing business, lifted Nigeria to some extent. And it has to do with perception. So when the investing public, including local and foreign, are now hearing that the environment is getting better, you understand? So the tendency for them to come and see it for themselves.
Let me put you on pause, Mr. Okeke. We're completely out of time, Mr. Waba in Abuja, but I cannot conclude a segment on the economy. We cannot conclude a segment on and not talk about power supply. Because all what has been said in the last 1 hour ties into power supply.
Yeah.
But as a labor leader, you are accused as being the first people to resist all forms of change in the power sector that can improve its efficiency and so on. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to answer this question.
I think that cannot be true because you can testify to the fact that Labour have made the issue of power a priority. In fact, there is no occasion we have had that we have not raised the issue of centrality of power to driving our economy. It's power that drives the economy everywhere around the world. And if you recall, recently at our May Day, I raised the issue of the failed privatization. Because one, some of the promises that were made to the effect that once we privatize, those issues will be addressed, is one, that government will no longer invest in power. We know how much government have invested after the privatization process. That will end darkness. We also know what is happening, despite the improvement, but clearly I think we are not yet there. And I think Labour have never resisted the effort that is being made to make sure that this particular important sector is revived, because it's central to our economic development and the prosperity of the country. So I think, if you remember, we have actually stood with the people to say that this is central, and therefore whatever we need to do it. I can give you an example of a country like Ethiopia, where in the privatization process, citizens actually bought in, and they generated resources. Not this one that we did, claiming that people bring resources from outside, and at the end of the day, I think no resources and expertise have been brought in. So clearly, I think we are on the same page to say that let us revisit the privatization exercise. Let us also do anything that is possible. Why did we say that we should generate more revenue? Because we realize the centrality of the issue of infrastructure to our economic development and prosperity. Without putting the necessary infrastructure in place like power, there is no industry that can thrive.
I'm told that your 2 minutes are up and that you are now exceeding the time. So, and I cannot stretch you beyond that. So I need to start with you, but I thank you very much for joining us on this segment. Ayuba Waba is the National President of the Nigerian Labour Congress. Thank you for joining us. And then our three very distinguished economists with us here in the studios, Dr. Biodun Adedikpe, Mr. Bismarck Rwani, and Mr. Marcel Okeke. Thank you very much for being with us. We're taking a break at this point, and when we come back, we'll move on to the final segment. In some places, it's the most controversial: corruption and the fight against it.
Here we go.